Hello and welcome to another episode of North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me as always, I have Jer, Alex, and Liam. Want to remind you that this podcast, is brought to you by you over at Patreon. And for those of you who are concerned, we just want to remind you that Patreon has actually rolled back their new policy, so hopefully that takes some stress off of some of you at home. We're going to start the episode with the same thing we always do, which is the best card you're not playing. Up today, we have Jer. Jer, what's your secret tech?
Volrath's Shapeshifter. It's 1 blue
Okay.
for a 0/2. It's got a static ability and an activated ability. The static ability is if the top card of your graveyard is a creature, it's a copy of that creature.
Oh, okay.
And it also has an activated ability. I think it's 1 and a blue, discard a card.
Okay.
I think it's just colorless to activate. Yeah.
Interesting.
All right, two colorless.
I thought you were going to say Volrath Stronghold, and you said Volrath Shape. What is this card?
It's a great combo card.
It's anything.
Was it?
So, and it's also a 0/1.
What was it printed in?
Eternal Masters or Vintage Masters.
I can't remember this Stronghold. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's just like instant speed. You can pitch a card to change what copy it is.
Yeah, so it's really strong in a Reanimator deck. That's where I got a lot of success with it because eventually I played a really big creature heavy version with a lot of looting effects, and often it's tough to get both a discard outlet and a reanimation spell like aligned together. And this card is both a discard outlet and sort of a reanimation spell.
That's super funny. You're like, attack with a 0/1, and your opponent's like, oh no.
Yeah, and it could be anything. Like it could be like.
And it's not super risky. I guess you play it even just for the looting effect. Like it does enough.
It's a discard outlet. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Cool.
And it's really cool because you can switch between offense and defense. Like you can like. The first creature you can pitch is something like Elishnorn, and you can wrath their board, and then you can change it to something like Jin-Gitaxias before your end step, so then you draw 7.
Interesting. I'm just imagining somebody just like blowing you up by wastelanding you, and it just like turns into a 0/1 with no abilities.
Yeah, there are definitely potentials to get blown out, but usually you're holding up a bunch of mana to make sure you have the upper hand.
There's also some cool stuff you can do with delve spells in this card.
That's true.
Oh,
just,
wow.
Delve your logic, not transform it into something they weren't expecting.
No. Just,
like
that. I guess. No, that's really neat. That's a fun interaction. I didn't even think about that.
This is a Graveyard Order Matters card, too, right? You can't rearrange your graveyard if this card's in your deck.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the fun little things about Eternal formats we don't have to talk about is Graveyard Matters. Matters in Highlander, sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, let's introduce today's theme. If you've read the title, or maybe Jared gave it away, today we're talking about Reanimator, and we want to do something a little bit different. So this is going to be a deep dive into an archetype, and we kind of broke it down that there are 4 types of sort of categories for Reanimator decks, and so for this episode, the 4 of us are all going to represent a different archetype and sort of talk about our points along with those.
4 more years.
Yeah. So Liam is going to be creature-based combo. Do you have some examples?
So obviously Tin Fins, and then the other ones that I'm going to talk about are World Gorger Dragon combo and Necrotic Ooze combo.
Yeah. Alex is just value.
So stuff like the Rock, certain aggro decks, and Aristocrats a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to be the grind, and this is where it gets a little bit also like the Rock and Abzan, just the sort of deck that tries to play fair targets and it just kind of gets you slowly over time. And then finally we have Jer, who is all-in classic Reanimator.
Yeah, like careful study, reanimate.
Yeah.
Entomb, reanimate.
So let's start off with a very brief definition of what is Reanimator in Highlander, and how does that change sort of in this format compared to how you'd classically see it. Jer.
So in Highlander, as opposed to most other formats, there's a bunch of different varieties of Reanimator, as Serge outlined earlier. Just because of the uniqueness of the format, you can do more with it. So there's like less all-in versions and more all-in versions. Because looting effects are so good in Reanimator style decks, the decks are actually pretty consistent to what you'd see in like legacy-ish builds. You can have like pretty similar consistency.
looting effects, just to clarify, is any effect that allows you to draw a card, then pitch a card.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you play a lot of... Yeah, so
Yeah,
you play...
it's like the opposite of rummage,
Yeah.
which came later, which was pitch a card, draw a card, which is significantly worse.
Yeah, you get to play a lot of cards like Careful Study, Faithless Looting, and then you even play cards like Thought Courier, Merfolk Looter.
Oh, we're getting deep. I like it. Yeah.
That's not that
Jace.
deep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jace Prince Prodigy.
Yeah.
It's
He's a pretty
interesting
good
that
looter.
Jace is actually probably worse than most of the other looters in
Not
this
as
deck.
good as Merfolk Looter.
Because you actually just want the looter in play more often than not in
Do
this
you
deck.
have to transform Jace?
You have to. It's not
Yeah.
not a main.
It's not like Search
So
for Azcanta.
we're talking about Jace Prince Prodigy, which is 1 and a blue for a 0/2. Has an activated ability. Tap, draw a card, then discard a card if your and then after you discard a card, if your graveyard has 5 or more cards in it, you transform Jace into Jace Telepath Unbound.
Is that what the other side is called?
Yep.
I didn't even know that. I just called it actual literal baby Jace this whole time. Telepath Unbound. Huh, I learned something today.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so the backside of this card is still good in Reanimator. It allows you to sort of double down on some of your reanimation spells. So it definitely has some utility, but more often than not, you just want the looting.
All right.
I've found.
Total tangent. Has anybody at this table ever ulted baby Jace?
In Highlander or at
in,
all?
Yes.
in Highlander.
I've never done it. I've had it done against me in Highlander.
Yeah?
I have.
Yeah.
And?
In Seinfeld. I won.
Ew.
I had my opponent ult Jace Telepath Unbound against me, and it was bad because they milled me, and then I played a Delve spell. I played Dig Through Time when I wouldn't have been able to cast it otherwise, and then I killed them. That was like
All right.
pretty
so,
bad.
50-50. All right. Well, let's go about how you'd build a Reanimator deck in Highlander. And then, so as we go through the topics, we're going to talk about our respective deck and how they do it. And so the first question is, how does your archetype or your niche variant of Reanimator win? So, Jer, how does all-in combo win?
You want to discard or get a really big creature in your graveyard as fast as possible and then reanimate it. Get it
fag,
into
if
play.
you will.
Yeah. So,
Fantastic.
Like, you're looking to get like Iona, Grizzlebrand, Elish Norn, Jin Gitaxis, something like that
So-
into play on turn 2 or 3.
Functioning like a combo deck. You're trying to do
Yeah.
something unfair and you're kind of a glass cannon.
It's definitely
you're paying way
definitely
less
a
mana
combo
for
deck.
something that's way too expensive.
Yeah.
So in the grind deck, you actually have, it's probably the fairest Reanimator deck? Maybe not. Maybe what Alex would get to and like that. Most of your Reanimator spells end up being cards you can likely cast as well. So an example would be Siege Rhino. Siege Rhino is 1 Abzan, and it has an ETB effect that drains your opponent's life and gains you life, and it also has a fairly aggressively costed body in terms of power and toughness. And so with Siege Rhino, what you can do is you can just play fair magic, damage them, and then hit them for stuff. Or if you get an effect like Recurring Nightmare, you can just start to attrition it over and over and over. If they remove your threat, you bring it back, or you take advantage of the ETB effect to just slowly attrition your opponent out. So yeah, the grind deck just tries to seek advantage through ETB threats and then utilizes its graveyard as sort of a second hand to get more value out of everything it does.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at when I mentioned the rock. Is some builds of this will play Recurring Nightmare to bring back stuff like Thrag Tusk. And
Yeah,
it's
that
like-
one's good with Recurring Nightmare.
Yeah, and like the like Baloths that gain you 4 life, and it's just actually like it'll get into these loops where it's recycling 2 just like good enters play creatures, and it just generates all this advantage.
One of my favorite tricks in the decks you play are like in a very low cost aggro deck, you'll play Reanimate or Unearth or something like that.
Exactly what I was going to
Animate
get to.
dead.
Yeah, like in sort of value, I will play sort of incidental reanimate spells. The 2 that Serge mentioned, Unearth and Reanimate, are quite good. Like Unearth is a single black, return a creature of CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to play. It also has cycling. This is great in low to the ground aggro decks because it's just sort of, if your creature gets killed or countered or something, you just bring it back for 1 black. And Reanimate's a similar spell. It's also a single black, but you bring back any creature from any yard, and you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Yeah. This works on your own guys. You can pay a couple life to get a 3-drop back, or if you've hit them with hand attack, you get back maybe their
The
huge thing.
dream.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah, thought sees them, then take their huge thing.
Yeah, sometimes maybe you'll play Necromancy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of mana, but that one's really tech. This is 2 and a black.
Yeah. For an enchantment.
Yeah. Oh,
It's got some of the most messed up rules text
it's
in all
really
of Magic.
complicated. The simple version is that it's an enchantment, it comes into play, and it hauls a creature out of any graveyard
Yeah.
and returns it to the battlefield. You may cast it as an instant,
Yeah.
in which case it's sacrificed at end of turn. So,
At cleanup.
at cleanup.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
you
even
can't
weirder.
use this on
at
end step
cleanup.
to get it on your next turn. This is relevant. I'll explain why in a minute, but yeah,
Okay.
it does matter.
But yeah, this is a really great value card because it hits any graveyard. There's no other drawback. You can cast it at instant to just either get a surprise blocker or
Yeah.
an enters play effect, maybe a leaves play effect. You can also use it to brown your opponent's
Oh man,
combo.
Allison browned me so hard with this
Yep.
card. I destroyed my own Academy Rector, and with the Academy Rector trigger on the stack, she stole it with Necromancy. And then when the turn ended, she got the Academy Rector trigger and got to bring back something else that just
Something
straight
insane.
goozled me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, as far as aristocrats goes, there's a little bit of incidental sort of reanimation stuff. I'll sometimes play those cards. There's a lot of creatures that just bring themselves back.
yeah,
That are just good. So it's like they have 2 bodies, which is relevant to sacrifice stuff. So creatures with the mechanic Unearth, or like
not
Undying.
Unearth.
or Undying,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
even that raid guy, the Bloodsoaked champion.
Oh,
Lots
yeah.
of champions.
Stuff like that.
yeah,
Grave
yeah.
Prowler,
Yeah.
Bloodghast.
Persist is pretty good too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so stuff like that where, it's stuff returning from the bin to just get like a second crack, either to just feed it into something or just like be an unusually stubborn aggro deck.
And something that Aristocrats decks will play is something like Wake the Dead or Rally the Ancestors, which is
Right.
like an instant speed, get back
Your bin.
a bunch of things. Yeah. Wake the Dead is, we'll just go with that one. It's X black, cast only during your combat on your opponent's turn. Return X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sacrifice those creatures at the beginning of the next end step. So this doesn't work that well for most decks. When all your creatures have when this creature dies abilities,
something,
and
or just-
they'll likely leave behind a second body, it can just be like
Devastating.
insane value, especially if you're bringing back a Blood Artist and a sack outlet. It can just be.
I've never even heard
It
of
can
this
just be
card
game
before.
over.
This card's also really good in Flash Hulk.
Oh, jeez.
Oh wow. All right, Liam, tell us how the creature-based combos win. This could get a little bit, depending on the combo, can get a little deep, but
Yeah, well, and so broadly speaking,
Yeah.
the decks are looking to do a similar thing to what Jared's describing in the sort of more conventional Reanimator strategies. The difference is these decks are much more all in, and they tend to be less resilient, but also generally, if you manage to reanimate the threat you're trying to reanimate, you win the game on the spot.
Yes.
So in Tin Fins, I've talked about this before, but generally you're trying to reanimate a Gristlebrand.
Yeah.
You don't play the looting effects to get it into the bin. You just play like Entomb and maybe a couple other ways, but you're not that all in. You're really all in on trying to entomb a Gristlebrand and then getting it back with haste.
let's talk about Grizzlebrand really quick, just to let the viewers know
Yeah,
what that
sure.
card does.
So Gristlebrand is 4 generic mana, and then it's 4 black mana.
Yeah.
So it's an 8 mana 7/7 with flying and lifelink that has the text pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. And in a lot of decks, this gets used kind of like an enchantment that just says pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. But in Tin Fins, it doesn't. We actually care about its power, its toughness, the lifelink, and also its converted mana cost. So Tin Fins is looking to reanimate a Gristlebrand with haste. So this Tin Fins uses reanimation spells like Shallow Grave,
Goryo's Vengeance.
yeah, and Goryo's Vengeance.
Necromancy.
It also uses Necromancy, though this is where it comes up as interesting. With cards like Shallow Grave and Goryo's Vengeance, you can use them on end step and then untap and still have the Gristlebrand and be able to attack with it. But importantly, you can't with Necromancy because it gets sacrificed on cleanup. If you Necromancy a creature on end step, it then gets sacrificed in that cleanup step.
Yeah.
So that's why I was going to say it's relevant. But anyway, so we bring a threat back with a haste. With the Tin Fins deck, you look to draw a lot of cards. You look to play a card like Sacrifice or Burnt Offering, which lets you sacrifice your Gristlebrand and get 8 mana out of it, but both of them do the same thing, which is that you sacrifice a creature and you get black mana, or in the case of Burnt Offering, black and red mana equal
red.
to the CMC. Yeah. And then from there, you're basically just a Storm deck. You're using Gristlebrand to draw 14 to 21 to 28 to 56 cards. And then you're killing them with the mana from this. Yeah, exactly. Worldgorger Dragon's a little bit different. With Worldgorger Dragon, you get it into the bin, and then you use a different reanimation spell. You have to use an enchantment.
So what is the dragon?
The Worldgorger Dragon is a 3 colorless and then 3 red for a 7/7 with flying and trample. So this card's like okay, but then when it enters the battlefield, you exile all other permanents you control.
Everything.
And when it leaves the battlefield, these come back. So what that means is that if you play an enchantment reanimation spell, you bring the Worldgorger Dragon back, and then there's a trigger on the stack, and the trigger makes all of your enchantments go away. All your permanents, including the enchantment, go away. But then when the enchantment leaves, it tells you to sacrifice the Worldgorger Dragon. So it goes back to the graveyard, you get all your permanents back, including that enchantment, which gets the Worldgorger Dragon back. And this is a loop.
Yeah.
What you can do in this loop is add mana with your lands, and then also if you have, ideally you have some way to draw cards or something like that, because this combo adds infinite mana, and then if you have something like Bazaar of Baghdad, which is a land that taps to draw 2 cards and then you discard 3 cards, or Gaia Reach Sanitarium is a new one.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I know Bazaar, I don't know the Sanitarium.
Gaia Reach Sanitarium is a Shadows over Innistrad card that...
Okay.
I think it might be Eldritch Moon.
Sure, it's from that block, which for 2 colorless, you can tap it to loot. Everyone loots. You and your opponent both loot. So it's kind of interesting. You can also use it to draw your whole deck if you have Worldgorger Dragon going. So yeah, basically this deck looks to loop the Worldgorger Dragon, then you draw and discard most of your deck, then you get an Una Queen of the Fae back is one of the ways to do this.
Oh, and just mill them out.
Yeah, and then so Una is 3 and then 3 hybrid blue-black for a 5/5 flyer that has an activated ability for X and a blue or a black. Where you choose a color, target opponent exiles the top X cards from his or her library. For each card of that color, you get a fairy for this. You just Una them for like $1 million, and they lose their whole deck.
For their deck.
Or imagine if you have any sort of ETB effect, like a ping effect or something like that. It'll also get
Just
there.
like even Banefire?
Yeah, you can also do it that way. The reason why Una is nice is that it works really well with Bazaaring, because with Bazaar you never end up cards. You always end up pitching the cards into the graveyard. But there are ways to do it for sure. I've also, the other way you could do it is you could just have Snapcaster Mage in your deck and eventually move the enchantment onto a Snapcaster and like Snapcaster back a Banefire, for instance. There's a bunch of options.
Sure.
And then the last one is Necrotic Ooze combo. This one's the simplest. And the reason we're playing reanimation spells in this deck, you don't technically need them, but you just want as many ways to recur the Necrotic Ooze as possible. So the Necrotic Ooze stack, Necrotic Ooze is a 2 and 2 black for a 4/3 that says as long as Necrotic Ooze is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all creature cards in all graveyards.
I didn't know it was all graveyards.
Yeah, relevant to keep in mind.
Your own. Cool.
Yeah, I have
don't
Death
think
Rate
of
Shamaned
that.
my opponent with a Necrotic Ooze in Cube before. It was great.
Cool.
Haven't done it in Highlander, but did it on Magic Online.
Yeah, okay.
So the way this combo works, it used to be kind of clunky the way you did it, but now it's really quite simple. You have a Necrotic Ooze, you have a Phyrexian Devourer. This is a 7 mana creature.
I think it's 6.
Might be 6.
I think it's 6.
Anyway, it's a
Devourer.
Yeah, it's a colorless creature.
6 mana, 1/1.
Yeah, that has an activated ability that you can exile the top card of your library and put +1/+1 counters on the Devourer equal to the converted mana cost of that card.
Yeah.
If the Devourer's power gets above 7, you sacrifice it.
Oh, and I see what the other half is. I can just fill in the
Walking
gaps.
Ballista, yeah. It's the
Ballista
second half
now.
of this. So Walking Ballista is XX for a 0/0, but the most important part that we care about here is that it has the ability to remove a counter and ping.
Yeah.
So with Necrotic Ooze in play and Walking Ballista and Phyrexian Devourer in the graveyard, you can put +1/+1 counters equal to the converted mana cost of your deck.
Yeah.
So it is actually finite damage. It's not
yeah.
infinite, but it's a lot. And then you can throw them all at your opponent. What's really good about this combo is that once the Ooze is in play, you can't interact with this combo, by and large. Because if you exile, you put counters on, you exile, you put counters on, and if at any time your opponent goes to try and remove your Necrotic Ooze,
You do it in response.
You just do it in response. So the reason that we play reanimation spells in this deck is, A, Buried Alive is the best way to get all 3 of these creatures out of your deck.
So Buried Alive is?
Buried Alive is 2 and a black for a card that says search your deck for 3 creature cards, put them in the graveyard. and then shuffle your library. So you just go get the combo, and then what's good is that you can use Buried Alive to tutor for the entire combo, and then you just jam reanimation spells. So this deck plays basically all of the above, actually, that we've just talked about.
Yeah.
It can play Recurring Nightmare. It can play certainly play Reanimate. It can't play Unearth, unfortunately. It plays all the enchantment-based ones. It can play Shallow Grave. It plays them all.
Yeah.
So those are the three ones. I've talked quite a while already.
That's fun.
But that's what we got.
So we've covered it a little bit here, but I want to give the other archetypes to talk about. So reanimation needs a means with which to disable a card.
Discard, you mean?
To discard, sorry. It needs a way to put a card in a graveyard. It needs a certain type of threat, and it needs a way to reanimate that. And some of the decks we've talked about getting there, and so, but basically, like, what is the overarching strategy on how you want to discard it, what the threat is, and how you bring it back, Jer?
So with traditional all-in Reanimator, you want to either cast a Faithless Looting or Careful Study effect, or have a Looter in play, and just draw discard until you can assemble thing in your bin, plus any reanimation spell you play, any of them that keeps your thing in play.
Because you're sort of accomplishing both at the same time, where you're like ripping through your deck to find the cards you want and pitching the ones that you don't and need.
It's really interesting in this deck that looting is actually better than just drawing cards.
Yeah.
Which in most decks is not the case.
Yeah.
But in this deck, you actively want ways to discard, because the most successful way I found to build this deck is to build it with lots of looting effects and lots of high-end creatures, just to increase consistency. And then the rest of the deck is...
Because I suppose, actually, one of the reasons maybe Reanimator works in Highlander is that there are a bunch of redundant copies.
No,
It's like,
yeah.
there's only one Grizzlebrand, but there's plenty of overcosted creatures that hit real stupid hard, and lots of reanimation spells, and lots of loot spells.
And that is the downside of this version as opposed to the more all-in combo versions, is that sometimes you can hit, like, the wrong creature for the wrong matchup. Like, sometimes you'll hit Elish Norn against a combo deck.
You're like, no. Yeah.
And that's not super effective, but other times you'll hit Iona versus the mono red deck.
And you're just like, that's a free win.
Yep.
So in the well, how did I describe it? The grind sort of deck, a lot of your discard is actually incidental. So you'll play something like Grim Flare. So Grim Flare is a green and a black, so 2 mana for a 2/2 with trample. And it has an ability, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top, is it 3 or 4 cards?
Three.
Top 3 cards of your deck, put them back in any order, or put them in your graveyard, and then if you have Delirium, which is activated if you have 4 or more different card types in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2. So Grim Flare suits the strategy of an aggressive creature that's going to put a clock on your opponent, but is also incidentally filling your graveyard with value. So if you can think about ways to advance your own board state and put pressure on your opponent while also filling your graveyard. So in the case that your opponent has an answer, you can bring it back and then just start to get the attrition going on it. So you're less focused on really filling your graveyard as quickly as possible and more taking advantage of a synergy between your graveyard and cards that interact with it.
Lotleth Troll.
Lol Troll?
It's a great segue from this, because
Yeah.
I've played both. It's the same mana cost as Grim Flare, black, green, for a 2/1 with trample, and it regenerates for a single black.
Yeah.
And you can pitch creature cards to it to put +1/+1 counters on it. So you can use this to the wombo with this is you pitch Gravecrawler to it.
Or like Bloodghast or something?
Yeah, or Bloodghast
sick.
or something like that.
Phyrexian Devourer.
That's
Not
maybe,
Devourer.
in a nutshell, the kind of synergy you get with
Phyrexian
the decks that I was
Dreadnought.
talking about with just value, because like it's even more incidental.
Yeah.
Like the ways that you are pitching cards are not just like I want to pitch a card. It's just like I have a means to pitch something that might be valuable later. Like I've played what's the Una's Prowler.
Yeah.
And sometimes
card's
I'll use
sweet.
that to throw out stuff like so
Talk about the Prowler really quick. What's Una's Prowler?
Una's Prowler is a 3/1 with flying for 1 and a black, and it has an activated ability: discard a card. Una's Prowler gets -2/-0 until end of turn. Any player may play this ability. So if you crack into your opponent and they have spare cards, they can nerf it. But if you're pressuring them really hard with a mono black or black green deck, you can maybe make that proposition not so good. And occasionally you'll play this out as your turn 2 threat, end of their turn, pitch your Bloodghast to it, and on your turn, play a land, cast a creature, and have multiple threats in play. So it's just like really incidental, just kind of utilizing your graveyard. You can also do tricks with like cards of flashback.
Yeah.
There's a couple of like red ones and some black ones.
Get to lava dart some people.
Yeah, lava darts. Or
The dream.
Also, like, there's a deck I've always been trying to get to work. I don't know what category this maybe gets into, but it's the Grapple with the Past Grizzly Salvage deck,
Oh, yeah.
which is just like
self-mill, basically.
self-mill, like incidental self-mill, but like value, as opposed to just cards that are just like just mill you.
Yeah.
These cards, you actually get something out of it.
One of the things you can do in the grind deck as well is like a Life from the Loam grind. So Life from the Loam is a 2-mana sorcery for 1 and a green that says return up to 3 target lands from your graveyard to your hand. And it has dredge. So instead of drawing, you can skip your draw step, take the top 3 cards from your library. Sorry, you can replace it, not skip it. Take the top 3 cards from your library, put them in your graveyard, and return Life from the Loam from your graveyard to your hand. And what this allows you to do is interact with really fun cards like Wasteland, which is a land that destroys a non-basic land.
Yes,
So you can go through the process of, again, sort of like grinding or attritioning your opponent, getting value off it for bringing it up, and then incidentally put other cards with dredge or cards with flashback or cards that interact with your graveyard in there while you're advancing your other game state. So you're actually getting something out of the fact you're putting cards in your graveyard while you advance the board state in a different direction.
So to just briefly bring it back to what I was talking about, there's cards like Bloodghast and Bloodsoaked Champion are perfect examples of cards that, like, if you happen to have a way of pitching cards or have made it so that you have to pitch cards. Actually, a great example is like Liliana the Veil.
Yeah.
It's like both players discard, and the card I throw out, I'm going to get back anyways because it has a inbuilt quality that allows it to return to play. So it's actually just as desirable to have it in my bin than in my hand.
Awesome.
So.
And then Liam, do you have anything else to add? You were pretty thorough before.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to quickly mention is that in all 4 of these archetypes, you're playing targeted discard. Like all of us are kind of packing the Thoughtseize, Duress, Inquisition,
Sometimes
while
you're Thoughtseizing yourself.
right, and while it's almost never Plan A, it's a plan that you can employ. So that's worth mentioning as well. But yeah, in the combo decks, you're all in on the tutors. Buried Alive, Entomb. I've played Gifts Ungiven to be Entomb before. Yeah, we like those ones.
All right, the last question about building a deck is, how does your strategy plan on interacting with your opponent? Jer.
You hope to get the right creature into play.
Are you playing
Or you just race
disruption or removal, or are you all in on just like getting the right creature?
You can play counter spells. You play the discard spells that Liam mentioned, but mostly you're just planning on getting a giant thing into play before they have the
it's
resources to deal with it. Yeah. Or just a thing that's hard to kill, like Inkwell Leviathan or Imperial Archangel.
Yeah.
So
the grind deck is probably the most interactive deck. But a lot of how it's interacting is through its creatures and through the threats it's playing, because it wants to play something like a Reclamation Sage, which is a 3-mana green creature with an ETB effect that destroys an artifact or an enchantment. Because if that comes in and then it ends up in your graveyard, you can also bring it back through some Reanimator shenanigans. So it's very interactive, but it's more fair and thus has less good matchups and less bad matchups. I don't know. It's just the fairer version in this conversation.
Yeah, for the decks that I was mentioning, Reanimation is kind of like a secondary, maybe even tertiary theme, which it's not an afterthought, but a lot of the threats that you would end up playing happen to pair well with a little bit of incidental reanimation. And I mean, there's little things like, I guess Volrath Stronghold gets into some of these decks.
Which is
Maybe an example of a sort of incidental card. This is a land that taps for colorless, and then for 1 and a black and tap it, you take a creature from your graveyard and put it on top of your library. So it gets you to recycle stuff. I see this in The Rock. I don't know if anybody else plays this.
It's really good in Necrotic Ooze.
I imagine so.
Because once you set up the Necrotic Ooze combo, you literally just every turn, if you have 6 mana, get to be like, Can you counter it this turn?
7.
Yeah.
but-
Sorry.
So-
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like a deck like Black Mold is looking to be aggressive first, probably have some disruption second, and third, if you have room for it, some threats that are resilient because they're hard to put away.
Your interactions just kill them.
Yeah,
Your interaction is pressure. That's fair.
yeah.
And then Liam?
Yeah, so like it varies. Tinfin's not looking to interact at all. We're trying to kill people on turn 2. And similarly with the World Gorger Dragon combo, that deck it plays more counter spells probably than maybe the all-in Reanimator that Jared's talking about, but not by a large margin. And a lot of those counter spells are defensive, not offensive. Necrotic Ooze is the one exception where that deck can actually be built a bunch of different ways. You can build it green-black and slant more towards being a mid-range deck that happens to have a combo in it. You can build it blue-black is the most common version we see now. And in being blue-black, you can either be really oriented towards the combo, or you can be kind of just a blue-black control deck with some I win buttons. So it varies wildly, though. It definitely tends towards not interacting very much.
You can also play a bug version.
Sure,
Yeah,
you can combine both together, yeah.
All right, let's go to our next sort of mini topic, which is why should somebody play your version, and then why shouldn't they play your version? So like, sell it and then tell us the cons.
So the all-in version is really fun to play. I think it's probably the most consistent of the combo versions, looping in including most of the decks Liam's talking about, just because you have so much redundancy. You're not looking for a specific creature, you're just looking for a big thing, and you get to play. With all the looting you have, your deck just feels really consistent. It's really easy to, like, a lot of the time you win, your opponent's just like, man, how is this deck fair? That being said, if you're playing against decks that have a lot of like catch-all answers like Wraths and unconditional removal, you can often end up getting the wrong creature. Like, as I mentioned before, if you get Elish Norn against a control deck, they can probably remove it pretty easily, and sometimes it's hard to reload because they're also able to take out your looters with Wraths and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes maybe you go and get, what's the Terastodon? And like maybe you blow up their lands, they untap, have some sort of like cheap kill spell, and then they have 9 power that you gave them.
Yes, they now have some Olifants.
That is a risk. So like you can also get like reverse blown out.
Oof. Yeah.
But
if you wanted to play the value grindy version, it's if you want to do a lot of stuff or maybe a lot of powerful nothing. I don't know. No, it's if you enjoy a mid-range deck, if you like casting spells on curve, if you like occasionally getting really strong hands in an otherwise fair deck, because sometimes even the Abzan mid-range deck gets Entomb Reanimate, and you bring back Primeval Titan on turn 2 or something like that. It's never as nuts as the combo decks, but you can get some really powerful turns. The other reason it's kind of great is it has better matchups against a lot of stuff. It doesn't have as good a matchups. It won't have as many free wins, but it's normally going to be, you're going to have game against a lot of decks. It's sort of the classic 60-40 grindy, almost mid-range, but with a plan B sort of style. So it's good on that. The cons are, it doesn't have a lot of free wins. And like we've talked in other episodes, sometimes it's better to play like an 80-20 deck than it is to play a 60-40 deck, because if you have a 60-40 deck, you shouldn't be surprised if you're 3-2 after 5 rounds.
Stuff like mono black aggro, Golgari aggro, aristocrats. I think if you like utilizing your graveyard as a secondary resource in an otherwise like aggressive, maybe sort of mid-rangey, maybe a little bit combo-y kind of deck, this is the kind of list for you, where you will rarely get the sort of like insane blowout like kill your opponent play unless you like reanimate something that's like nuts from their bin, but occasionally just you can come at them from unexpected angles, and your deck is very resilient because like it just keeps coming back, unless they have graveyard hate, in which case it can brick your deck a little bit more than other decks might experience.
What are you weak against?
Deathrite Shaman.
Just like
Scavenging Ooze.
something that hits your
Scavenging
library
is a
and
nightmare.
gains life.
Withered Wretch.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And I think in those decks you're also weaker to like some of the bigger mid-range decks sometimes because you're not doing anything super unfair with your graveyard. You're just getting value.
Yeah, it's just
So if like your opponent just like slams Thrag Tusk, it doesn't matter how many times you can bring back Bloodswept Champion.
it can't block
never,
anyway.
It's never beaten the Thrag Tusk.
Yeah.
Jer, sell us and protect us from your deck.
Liam, the other Jer.
The other Jer.
Better Jer.
Harry Jer.
Better Jer.
I mean,
I went with Harry Jer.
Sorry.
I appreciate it.
Wow.
Wow.
Sell us and protect
But you're
us. Yes,
better,
fair
Liam.
enough. So
Because you were kind of a boogeyman
Good
when we had a
or-
little Highlander tournament here, and some people loved your deck and some people hated your deck.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
certainly polarized. So
You did not draw us.
I did. I did draw very well. That's certainly true. And that's one of the reasons to play my decks. If you're interested in drawing very well and killing people
Spectacularly.
and really early on in the game, I think that in particular Tin Fins is the fastest goldfish in the format. I think this is not an uncontroversial opinion, but
It's probably true from the decks that people play regularly. Like you could build a deck that like either wins on turn 1 or does nothing, but
yeah. So that's really powerful. If you think that your opponents aren't going to be interacting with you very much, then this is a way to really demonstrate to them that they probably want to interact with you more. In particular with Tin Fins. With World Gorger Dragon, I think that a lot of the allure comes from the fact that you get to play a little bit more of a control deck. Like World Gorger fits into a control strategy okay. You get to play some kind of sweet games with World Gorger as well. I think with these decks in particular, it can feel a little bit more like solving a puzzle than it can with the version that Jared's talking about, where like you kind of just have to slam
You
your
just
head into
count
the
to
wall.
3.
Right. Well, like Jared is kind of like jamming a key into a door, and sometimes it works. Whereas like with this, you're like lock picking. It's different, right?
Sure.
So like Jared always has the key, whereas like sometimes you just like fumble and break your lock picks. But when you do successfully pick the lock, you're getting through every time. Great analogy, right?
Sure.
I do think World Gorger and All in Reanimator are like probably the two most similar.
Yeah, they're definitely the
archetypes we've
closest.
talked about.
And then with Necrotic Ooze, the reason you play Necrotic Ooze is it's really quite resilient. Like other than Graveyard Hate, it doesn't fold too much. And against Graveyard Hate, it is rough. I mean, all these decks are going to be bad against Graveyard Hate, right? But the really nice thing about Necrotic Ooze is that you kind of just get to keep jamming. You have so many spells in your deck that matter. Like Alex was saying with Volrath Stronghold, I had this happen where I was playing a control deck against Necrotic Ooze, who had the loop set up where he was just casting Necrotic Ooze every turn, and it was just a question of like, can you stop at this turn? Okay, great, that's fine. Can you stop at this turn? Oh, great, no worries. Can you stop at this turn? You can't. You're dead. Right. So
Game 2.
yeah, it was match unfortunately. But yeah, so yeah, you should play these decks if you want to win early, or in the case of Necrotic Ooze, you want to play a resilient deck.
All right, our last question, internal question, I made these questions, is how do you feel about Reanimator in the metagame? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's important? Do you think it's a good barometer? Where does your deck fit?
I think it's really good when people aren't expecting it. Like, if there's not a lot of Scavenging Ooze and Deathrite decks in the room, that's usually like about as much Graveyard Hate as most people play. And so, like, you can definitely run into a lot of good matchups. Like, if there's a lot of other linear decks out there, like Reanimator's traditionally really good against other linear decks.
For example,
aggro decks, Reanimator's traditionally good against other combo decks because you can often put a big creature in play that stops their combo and kills them really fast. So
I don't think Storm can win through Rayana, can it?
They can,
they
but it's
can,
hard.
but it's hard. Yeah, like it's hard for them to beat a lot of things. Like you can put Plats into play, Platinum Empyrean into play on turn 2. You thought turn 4 was early. Wait till you get turn 2 Platinum Empyrean. And if you reanimate Platinum Empyrean, it works similarly to Madcap, that you don't lose the life.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's exciting.
Yeah.
Huh.
The life loss ones are really
it's
good
in
with
play
that.
and then the spell
Right,
resolves.
right,
Yeah. Mystery.
It puts it into play, then causes you to lose life.
Doink.
I think the grind deck it should have a place in any healthy metagame because it sort of falls into one of those fair decks. It's just a mid-range deck with a little bit of a higher end and maybe play slightly less mid-rangey cards in favor of the graveyard ones, trying to get that extra value out of synergy. But I think it's just a fair deck. It's not, it belongs in a healthy metagame, and if it's not there, that's also fine. It's not a barometer where it's like, if this deck is missing from your archetype, something has gone wrong, or your archetype from your metagame, something's gone wrong. It's just a fine deck.
Yeah, I think what I was talking about is similar. It's just like they're perfectly fair decks that have a couple of nice graveyard synergies, and they can be in your meta or not, and it's not going to necessarily indicate something.
Yeah, my decks are generally either going to feel unplayable
Degenerate.
or broken. Yeah, well, like generally these more all-in combo decks are gonna either feel like they're oppressively good or bad, right? Like it's tricky to find a metagame where the turn one combo deck feels fair. So generally, if you find that these kinds of decks are really powerful and really hard to beat, you should look at the metagame, and odds are there's not a whole lot of interaction going on. Similarly, if these decks are completely absent, you would expect to find the metagame full of graveyard interaction, counterspells, discard, fast clocks,
Sure.
All that kind of stuff. Again, my decks are the weirdest because I think they're on a bit of a sliding scale. I think you can play Necrotic Ooze in almost any metagame. I don't think you can play Tin Fins in a lot of metagames.
I agree.
So, and I think World Gorger is somewhere in the middle of that scale.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's our topic on Reanimator, and hopefully you enjoyed the breaking it down from. I mean, luckily Reanimator fit into 4 nice categories for everyone we had here.
One thing I want to do is just describe the differences a little, because we talked about what was in each deck a little
sure.
bit, but we didn't actually describe the main differences and like how to identify them. So like if you're sitting across from it,
Oh, cool. Yeah. What
Sort
does
of like,
what does a
how do
turn
I-
1 or 2 play look like?
not even, or like once you like most of these decks are capable of going like turn 2 Entomb, Reanimate, Grizzlebrand, except for maybe
Sure.
Alex's
Yeah.
decks.
Or yeah.
Like
Okay, go
it
ahead.
could even be out of the grind deck.
Sure.
So like if you're playing against traditional Reanimator, you're going to see things like the Looters, the Careful Studies. You're going to be seeing like off-color reanimation targets.
Yeah, they're
So
never planning on casting.
It's
Yeah.
like a base blue-black deck, but they're going to play like white creatures and green creatures
Yeah.
and artifact creatures.
And so if you see the grind deck, you're not going to be seeing blue for the most part. Typically, it's either Abzan or black-green.
Yep.
You're going to be seeing like lower cost things like Siege Rhino. You're going to be seeing like more hand attack. You're going to be seeing like Sylvan Library, those types of things.
Yep.
From the aggro decks, it's pretty obvious. You
Aggro.
probably just got ran over game 1. And,
so beep beep.
I think those decks are the hardest to like predict that there's going to be a reanimation spell involved.
Yeah,
yeah,
because-
that's what I mean. You like
Well, yeah, because there might be and there might not be.
you
And
probably can't afford to play around it. And then with Liam's decks, Tin Fins, you'll find out
Pretty quick.
real quick. There's not really any telltale signs. I don't think until you're going off there's any real telltale signs.
Yeah, like
To tell you apart from a normal Reanimator deck.
Beforehand.
well, I look more like a Storm deck, I think.
Yeah,
before
I'd
you
agree.
go off.
If
You
it
look
looks
like-
like they're doing like a whole lot of nothing,
Yeah.
but
That's a bad sign.
you like maybe heard Grizzlebrand from their table earlier, maybe you can put them on Tin Fins.
Well,
but
and also I think the other thing to be sort of like suspicious of is if the deck spends like a bunch of the first couple of turns like cantripping or tutoring or hand attacking, but like not doing anything else.
Yeah,
that means there's likely some sort of shenanigans
I love
afoot that's
I
going to
love
be
the
an A
Storm
plus
player.
B.
Yeah, if the player goes, it's like turn 3 and they draw and they're just like pass. Yeah. And then you're probably against
yeah,
Storm.
if they're playing their cantrips and hand attack and they don't play like Brawl or like what's the artifact creature with Death Touch of the cantrips?
Baleful
Oh,
Strike.
Baleful
like
Strix.
Baleful Strix or anything like that. Like those early little cards don't show up. It's like you're up to something.
Yeah. World Gorger looks a lot like traditional Reanimator, but probably with less looting and more tutoring.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really looking to tutor for like Buried Alive or Entomb. And the lands Liam mentioned earlier, like Miko Koro, Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and Bazaar are really telltale signs that they're World Gorgering.
Yep.
And then Ooze, in whatever flavor, traditionally plays more like a mid-range deck. So like you'll be seeing like more counter spells, more discard, and they'll just be going a little little slower.
Yeah,
So those are some ways to differentiate.
I think I was at a Monday once, and I completely mistook it for just like bug mid-range until
Yeah.
it showed up, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
this
Yeah.
deck.
And those types of decks, especially when people don't know what you're on, is so dangerous. Where you're just like playing a normal game, and then your opponent taps out, and then you're like, "Oops, I
Got
win."
him. Yeah.
One other piece of valuable information is that a lot of these Reanimator decks, the combo ones in particular, are going to rely on transmute spells a lot.
Yeah.
So if
The
you see
unpointed tutors.
Yeah, so if you see people transmuting for Buried Alive especially, you should be worried that it's a combo deck. And if you see someone transmuting for Entomb, like the regular Reanimator deck doesn't play Dizzy Spell, right?
It can. It depends because it functions as either Entomb or Reanimate.
Reanimate, sure.
So
I
like,
think broadly speaking, anybody playing transmute spells is gonna be on combo.
Right.
but
'Cause
but
that's-
Liam means to differentiate from
I see.
you're gonna die literally that turn and not gonna get to untap, or like you might be facing down a Grizzlebrand.
Yeah, so like a fair Reanimator deck still has to hit you to death with the creature it brings back, and you
Yeah.
can interact with it, versus the combo deck kills you the turn it resolves.
Right. If you see your opponent transmuting for Shallow Grave, you should be prepared for them to try and kill you on any given turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's an excellent summary from
Yep.
that. No, awesome on that one. Shall we go to our closing segments?
I love it.
All right, up next we have Powerful Magic. And up today is me. I have a story from Monday. So we record in the middle of the week, and this was actually this Monday. And I was playing Silesia midrange, so green-white midrange, and I'm trying to punch people and turn people sideways, which is not my usual style of deck, but I just...
It's very odd, very
fair, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was playing against a mono-red player on red deck wins. And as we're talking about in our mid-range episode, sometimes when you're playing mid-range, you need to know you can change your deck back and forth. If you're against a slow deck, you have to play very aggressive. If you're against the aggressive deck, you basically shift into a control deck. And so what's happened is they've played a Grim Lavamancer on turn 1, which is a single red mana for a creature that is a 1/1, and you can pay a red and tap it and exile 2 cards from your graveyard to deal 2 damage to a creature or player. So a really good threat in the RDW deck that wants to just use a bunch of burn spells and then get additional value. And I've played a 2-drop that they used a burn spell to kill. I played a 3-drop that they used a burn spell to kill, and they're getting this like incidental damage on me over and over. Finally, on turn 4, I played, I think it's called Ripjaw Raptor.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new 4/5 from the
Yeah.
new set from Ixalan.
Oh.
Yeah,
card's
it's a
awesome.
dinosaur.
Good.
It's for 2 green. It's a 4/5, and it has Enrage. Whenever it's dealt damage, draw a card. And my
I love
opponent,
that you're playing this.
my opponent was just kind of like, uh-oh. And so they had a 2/2 for 1, and again, the aforementioned Lavamancer. And I hadn't taken that much damage yet, because he kept using his burn to try and kill my creatures. So I was like, I'm just going to attack you with this. So I hit you for 2, and then you hit me for 2, back and forth. And I'm terrified, and I'm playing around Price of Progress. I've got like 4 lands in hand. And then finally, I draw a Dromoka's Command off the top. And Dromoka's Command has a lot of modes. A lot of modes. The card's great. I won't go over all of them because...
I've never beaten it in my entire life.
Yeah.
I haven't won a game where my opponent has resolved a Dromoka's
He's
Command.
not wrong.
So I've got Dromoka's Command in hand, and I'm just sitting there like, should I wait for Price of Progress? What'll happen? I mean, this clock's going pretty well. I'll see what happens. Whatever. I'll just pass. And
I guess it is relevant to say that Dromoka's Command can prevent all damage from a red instant or sorcery spell.
I may as well read it over.
Any
So
instant
Dromoka's
or
Command.
sorcery.
Green-white for an instant. You get to choose 2 of these modes. One of the modes is prevent all damage target instant or sorcery would deal. Target player sacrifices an enchantment. You put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. All of these modes are relevant in red. You can use the +1/+1 to make them waste 2 burn spells, because if they want to kill my dinosaur, they're probably going to have to use at least 2 spells. Prevent all damage from an instant or sorcery against burn makes a ton of sense. Sacrifice an enchantment is relevant as a way to get rid of
Blood Moon.
Sulfuric Vortex.
Blood
And
Moon and
Sulfuric
Sulfuric Vortex, and finally fight a creature is just a removal spell. So all the possibilities are going through my mind. I pass, and my opponent only has 2 red mana up, and they're like, oh, great, tap to incinerate you. I'm like, well, that was easy. It came up already. So I'm like, Dromoka's Command, prevent the damage from your burn spell, have my Ripjaw Raptor fight your Grim Lavamancer because you don't have mana up to tap it and burn any spell. This is going to be great. And this is, as the mid-range deck, when I'm about to turn the corner, you know, you've established control, it's not going to get over there.
Oh god, did you die?
and I'm just like fist pumping over and over, and then I pass,
you
and I
died.
forgot. No, I forgot about Enrage. I just forgot to draw the
you
extra
didn't draw a
card.
card.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it wasn't that bad. I didn't die. I still got there with the game, but instead of getting this sick 3-for-1 and then just cementing it, I was so excited that I got the burn spell and killed the Grim Lavamancer that I totally forgot about Enrage.
This story took a different turn from what I was expecting it to.
So whatever, I had a sick line. It was gonna be great, and then I just like slightly punted it, and I was just
powerful
like,
at all.
Yeah, so this story
the
is
opposite of
slightly
powerful.
less powerful than possible magic.
This is adequate ham magic.
I don't know. Oop. I just like I laughed so hard I destroyed my microphone.
All
It's
right.
fine. I loved it. I thought it was a great moment,
pretty hot.
and it's just a great use of a card and a situation where I almost got a 3-for-1, and then I was bad at magic.
Yeah, all of those things are true.
So
It's so good.
So that was our episode. This is our first deep dive into another topic. So this is a continuation of our Let's Talk About. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you got an idea of what you want to see in the next episode, let us know down in the comments. A reminder that this episode is brought to you by you over at your support at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. And then from the whole North 100 team, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.